You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.
So, hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. Welcome one, welcome all. We're so excited to have you with us here on another episode. If this is your first time watching the show, where have you been? Didn't you know that this is the place to be? And if you are a returning guest, please, we enjoy all of you tuning in, your comments, your questions, everything is much appreciated. So thank you for supporting the show. So for all of you first-time viewers, Changing Reality is a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are in essence changing their own reality. And through this show, we have the opportunity to hang out with an array of phenomenal people, from social change makers, entrepreneurs, business owners, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world, and many of whom have spent some time here on the Penn campus as well. And by hearing these brilliant stories on how they managed to not only change their lives, but reciprocally change the lives of those around them, hopefully we'll be able to pick up some nuggets of wisdoms that we can use in our own journeys and shorten the learning curve that we are taking towards our own goals and dreams. And I wanted to do this show simply because I feel like there are so many people out there who do phenomenal things and make waves in the lives of those around them. And I'm sure those stories, and you'd agree with me on this, that stories that they have the power to influence the way that we look at ourselves and the world around us. And I believe that these stories are essentially the keys and the essence to unlocking the different tips and tricks, the different strengths and weaknesses, the different ideas that we have within us, so that we too can start figuring out how we can change our reality. And to show you how much I believe in the power of stories and how much it's helped me personally in my life, I actually founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance based on the power of stories. We started off in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, but today we work with not just our own Malaysian Ministry of Education, but over 28 countries to help everyday students from elementary all the way up to college discover what they love doing, go out there and get real world experiences, and incubate their own careers. And we've been fortunate over the years to run various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, projects, and so much more to help over 35,000 students, 28 countries, and to date have even incubated countless number of student-run projects and social enterprises run by students as young as 8 to 25 years old. And the essence of all of that has been stories, has been kind individuals who have been willing to share their time, their expertise, their journeys, so that we can learn from their experiences. And just like that, I hope that this show is that same platform for all of you, so that all of you listening today can hopefully squeeze out the lessons that you need and figure out a little bit more about yourself and things that you want to do from this show. So if there's any topics that you want to talk about, if there's any conversations that you want to have, let us know, and we'll try our best to bring them on the show and to curate the experiences that you need to excel in things that you want. And many of you have been expressing a huge interest in the world of education, and especially in the world of education and entrepreneurship, and how those two things intersect. So our theme for this month is on the world of education, fortunately enough. And we have someone who is probably the most exemplary individual on campus to represent these two interesting and phenomenal yet different kind of worlds. We have with us a serial entrepreneur and a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, who today, as our guest speaker, has not only gone out there and excelled phenomenally as an entrepreneur, but who has founded, funded, and at the same time mentored and aided several education ventures over his 25-year career. He started his career as a strategy consultant at KPMG, where he actually performed market research for the commercial development of space, which in itself is crazy and a huge different world in its own right. And he later was recruited to serve as a senior executive on two digital marketing agencies, one of which went public in 1998. From there, he pursued his passion for public education, started his own EdTech incubator where he co-founded PACE, the Partnership for Academic and Community Excellence, which has gone on to actually connect millions of parents in all 50 states across the US. They basically they are basically a school-to-home communication network. And as I said, have helped thousands of K-12 students across the country to actually have the resources to get connected from school and home. And they were sold to NTI Group and then to Blackboard for 182 million, which is again, out of this world. And today, our speaker serves as an entrepreneur in residence and the director of innovation programs at Catalyst at the Penn Graduate School of Education. Here, he mentors aspiring education entrepreneurs, supports the Milk and Penn GSE Education Business Plan competition, and is a huge contributor towards the education entrepreneurship ecosystem that we all get to enjoy and that we all get to learn from. So, without further ado, I think we have waited long enough to meet the legend himself. So, let's invite our speaker onto our virtual stage. Welcoming John Gamba.
Hey Arsha, how you doing? Great introduction. I love the passion and I love the energy. It's great to be here.
Well, it's a bit scared. Like I don't think there's a way to read your introduction that is boring. So I don't think it's essentially a apt praise, because you have done so many phenomenal things. You have created, you have mentored, you've guided. So thank you so much for being on the show to actually share your experiences with the wider Penn community.
Thank you for having me. It's interesting when you share that bio, I'm often reminded of the famous Michelangelo quote, who said, "If you only knew how hard I worked at my craft, you wouldn't be so surprised at what I've created." I have a little bit of a different bent on that quote. I like to say, if you only knew how many times I failed at entrepreneurship, you wouldn't be so surprised at my occasional success. And I think that's a key theme of my work as an entrepreneur is, how do we overcome adversity? How do we ensure that we're resilient and perseverant? But it's just awesome to be working here in this job at the University of Pennsylvania. My roots, where I started coming to campus at a young age, given my roots were both of my parents attended University of Pennsylvania as well.
No, I think you were, of course, a graduate of Penn. You worked at Penn. Your parents were Penn alumni, and I think your son also recently graduated from Wharton, right?
So, That's right. Yeah, this past June, it was a really exciting time. I had the honor of celebrating my own 30th reunion, but my father also celebrated his 60th reunion. And at the same time of me celebrating my 30th and my dad celebrating my 60th, my son walked down Locust Walk as a graduate from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. So it was a great time. The three Johns, celebrating incredible milestones.
Okay, that is number one, insane, because of course the name legacy itself is crazy, but it's also crazy how you guys spaced it out at exactly like 30 years. Like was this the grand plan? Like, okay guys, like we've got to all like finish our papers so that we can all celebrate the 30-year intervals. But okay, very cool. I think we can start off right off the bat and embarrass your son a little bit. I think we have a photo of you delivering a lecture, and as well as having speaking a little bit about him as a graduate there on the projector, if I see right. Tell me about this in a sense. What were you saying? Tell us the story that we promise we will not relay to your son afterwards.
It was a great lecture. It was to Leadership in the Business World, which is a Wharton summer program that teaches aspiring high school seniors from around the world on leadership skills, leadership principles, and the basics of what you'd learn through a Wharton undergraduate education. I shared that day lessons learned on my entrepreneurial journey. And I shared a story. Your theme of this show is the power of stories. And I was sharing how, when I was an up and coming entrepreneur, starting a couple of companies back when JJ, my son, was born, I can remember running the company out of my house and almost running out of money. That's the biggest rule in entrepreneurship. Droom, don't run out of money. And we were running out of money. It was one of those stories of overcoming adversity and being perseverant. And I'll never forget, my son kind of looked up at me at that time and said, "Well, Dad, I guess it's time for you to get a real job." And it's funny, I shared that story. And now, of course, he's off to his own races as a graduate of the Wharton School, taking entrepreneurship courses, majoring in marketing, and now working on pursuing a career in the film industry. So I shared that story, and a lot of the students got a kick out of it. That smart ass son who said get a real job is later, going through the process of his own career journey at the University of Pennsylvania.
Well, as you said, the world of entrepreneurship is such that you get 99% failure or 80% if you're lucky, in a sense. So I'm sure you get the opportunity to, come back and at least at one point point it back out and reverse that on your son, hopefully.
That's for sure.
But no, it's amazing, and you have done so many things specifically in education. Like you brought entrepreneurship into the world of education in your career as well, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think when we last spoke, one of the things that you mentioned is that your family had a big influence on how you saw education growing up as well. And I think you mentioned your dad was a first generation college student and the impact that that had on it. Growing up, what was kind of the talk around education in your household in a sense, and how important was it to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, first of all, both of my parents were first generation high school
Mhm.
graduates, not even college graduates. None of my grandparents graduated from high school. They were immigrants, hard workers, blue collar workers. Um, and they instilled in my parents the importance and power of education. In fact, my grandfather, Angelo Gamba, was a bridge painter. He actually painted bridges in Newark, New Jersey, and he would never allow my father to hold a paintbrush because he worried that he'd like it. He said, "No, you're going to go to school. You're going to go to college." And lucky enough, my father was offered a scholarship to go to the University of Pennsylvania. He was a student athlete. He graduated in 4 years, although he thought in the first week that he would never be able to graduate from the University of Pennsylvania.
I'm sure everyone thinks that at Penn right now as well. But yeah.
As fate would have it, when he graduated, he met my mother, who was a student at Penn School of Nursing, where she graduated. And then kind of the rest is history. I was born in 1970, and some of my first memories was going to Penn versus Princeton basketball games at the Palestra. It instilled in us, my dad instilled in us a hatred for orange and black. We still don't celebrate Halloween in our family because of the colors. We hate Princeton. But I can never forget those incredible nights going to games at the Palestra and just walking around campus and just feeling this sense of pride and honor and always thinking maybe someday I'll be able to come here. And then sure enough, in 1988, I entered the University of Pennsylvania. My mom had graduated after Penn School of Nursing as a graduate student in sociology in the mid 80s. So I was going to campus then when she was attending class right off of Locust Walk. But more importantly, I think is this instilling this sense of purpose in the field of education. My father was a school board chairperson of a school district outside of Philadelphia. My mom was a community college professor in teaching statistics. My sister was a Montessori teacher. So education has always been in our DNA. We always wanted to, do good and do well in the field of education as an education entrepreneur, in my case. And, that led to the forming, led by my mom and dad, of the Gamba Family Foundation, which came together in 2007 with a mission and a vision of closing the achievement gap for inner city schools. So the four of us get to work together and invest our resources in causes related to the deeper learning movement and again, closing that achievement and opportunity gap for underserved communities in the United States.
No, but it's actually like not only is that heartwarming to hear, but that's actually so brilliant that all four of you have taken a slightly different on like education path in a sense, in terms of your careers, and then now you kind of get to bring those experiences together and do something to give back to the community as a family. That's lovely in a sense, and we probably should get more families to do things like that. So just like hint, all families out there, like learn, listen, learn, yeah. Um, Tell me a bit about like the time when you were like rewind the clock when you were a college student deciding what you wanted to do. I know you majored, if I'm not mistaken, in US history. Did you know back then that okay, education entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship in general was something that you wanted to do? Or what was kind of like college teenager you thinking about when you thought of the rest of your life back then?
That's a great question as well. So I went to graduated from a Jesuit high school, Georgetown Prep in Rockville, Maryland, and I think the roots really were the Christian service project that I was involved with at a soup kitchen, where I had to go for I think 10 weeks Sunday mornings to serve at a local soup kitchen in Washington D.C. As we know, the Jesuit tradition of men for others really instilled this, a purpose-driven life, giving back. Being selfless, constant thought of others. And so when I, went through my high school years, I had a teacher, Dr. Oakes, Stephen Oakes, who's still there teaching, who was my American history teacher. And I just loved American history. I loved his style of teaching. When I got to Penn, I looked at a lot of different majors and decided on a track of American history. My advisor was Drew Gilpin Faust, who went on to become the president of Harvard University. And so I had a great experience as an American history major at Penn. When I graduated from Penn, I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I thought it was something related to law. I was kind of on a pre-law track and actually worked at a public defender's office in Washington, D.C. when I graduated from Penn, and quickly discovered 6 months into that experience that I didn't want to be a lawyer, and that possibly business was for me. I then went into, as you shared on my bio, a role as a high-tech consultant at KPMG Pete Marwick in Washington, D.C. Had a wonderful partner who taught me the fundamentals of business strategy, marketing, sales, business development, operations, and then got recruited out of there back when the internet was this kind of mysterious, this World Wide Web was going to, change the face of business, and joined a digital agency, which later went public in 1998, US Interactive, first Magnet Interactive in Washington, D.C., and then US Interactive in Los Angeles, California. But I always had this vision and this idea that game-changing things could be created in the field of education through the use of technology. And that's when I founded Incubate in 1998, which was an ed tech incubator built through the vision of sort of Bill Gross's Idea Lab, where we would look at business plans, we would help raise funding, we would, kind of a venture studio model, bring in resources to develop products. One of those products and platforms became PACE, the Partnership for Academic and Community Excellence, which was a transformative platform that allowed administrators to record personalized voice messages and send those messages to parents in a moment's notice. And then I was kind of off to the races in building out that company from 1998 until its ultimate exit in 2008 to Blackboard in an all-cash transaction.
Oh gosh, that itself is mind-boggling to think. I think we mentioned it was in the hundreds of millions when you guys sold the company, and when it was acquired, in a sense, which is every entrepreneur's dream, really. You spend 10 years building out something that not only has a lot of monetary value, but I think the work that you guys had a lot of actual value and impact among the students, among the teachers, among the parents, in a sense, in connecting the different people involved in the kids' education together. And we'll get to that in a moment. But you skimmed through so many interesting things so fast that I'm going to have to go back and I'm just have to pick that apart. First of all, space. Like, okay, I'm like, space is my trigger warning, because like I love space too much, and I love essentially anything to do with I think the whole outer space and universe out there. You worked in one of your first roles, as you mentioned, in KPMG. I think one of the consulting clients and projects you had was with NASA. How do you even start learning about things like this? Isn't that literal? Like they say, I'm not a rocket scientist, right? That's quite literally a rocket scientist's kind of forte. So as someone coming out of college, like figuring out, okay, first thing that I did, it wasn't really my cup of tea. How did you get sucked into something that was equally complicated and completely different in a way?
Yeah, this is a great story. Again, the power of storytelling. After my experience as working in the public defender's office, I had a friend who just said, "Hey, we're looking for program analysts and consultants in the strategic, the strategy division of KPMG. Come in and interview." I went in and interviewed. They said, "Hey, you went to Penn." I had a concentration in the Wharton School in Management, so I had a little bit of a business background. I was hired, and the partner and manager said, the first place we're going to put you in is in the commercial development of space division, where you'll be doing market research and analyst reports on the commercial development of space. I was like, I'm in. And it's funny because I had no interest in this at all. Fast forward, I had no interest in the commercial development of space. But I will tell you that fast forward, I don't know, 30 years, my wife is an Ancient Aliens space fanatic. So when I tell her these stories of how we were doing market research on crystallization in space, low Earth orbiting satellites from Orbital Sciences, and what that could mean from a medical science standpoint, what that could mean from a remote sensing standpoint, all of your maps, all of your crop images, all of this was kind of the roots in the mid 90s when I had gotten involved in this division at KPMG, where NASA was our largest client. So I did a lot of market reports. I was published, and I learned a lot about LEO and GEO satellite systems, low Earth orbiting and geosynchronous satellite systems, which is kind of the roots of what we see with Elon Musk and SpaceX and a lot of what's going on right now in the commercial development of space. Know nothing about it now, but that was the roots of my my business experience.
It's terrible that you didn't like space. It's terrible, and oh my god, that is quite literally an out of this world opportunity and an out of this world career, pun intended. How do you, like, again, in a sense, one of the things that's quite interesting in your story is you did so many different things even before you found like your niche in education, entrepreneurship, in a sense. How do you train your mind to pivot and learn so quickly in each of these new roles? Again, public defender's office, and then space, and then you move into I think even like digital media before you actually find that niche. How do you start learning and relearning, and when do you know when it's time to move on to the next thing?
Yeah, I think there was an innate curiosity in anything I did. As I was growing up, I was just curious about sports. I was curious about business. My father was a business executive in a Fortune 500 company, so I kind of watched, and ultimately he became my mentor. I became curious as to what does differentiation mean? What does a value proposition mean? How do you develop a mission, vision, and core values in a business? So there was an innate curiosity there. When the internet and the World Wide Web kind of started developing in the early 90s into the mid 90s, I just read anything and everything. Wired magazine, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, just a lot of different things that said the world, what is a database, and who is, what is Oracle and what are they doing? A lot of great mentorship, a lot of great opportunities to work with people who are pioneers in this field. I mean, we were literally putting up some of the first branded websites on the internet: Mercedes-Benz, Kellogg's, Fox Entertainment, and it was just a great experience to think about what the future of digital technology would hold. What would we do when we went beyond just branded websites into e-business applications, multi-tiered applications, e-commerce. And that kind of became the basis of, wow, how can we transform education by applying certain digital technologies to transform the way that education does business? And that kind of was the roots, and came up with this best practice, BEST, which was a framework for developing new business plans and business strategies in the world of education and education technology. And the rest is history. I'm still using that methodology and that framework in the work that I do right now as entrepreneur in residence at Penn's GSE.
Crazy. And I think like your time at, I think, Magnet Interactive, if I got the name right, you work, yes, on entertainment, but also on edutainment. What is that, in a sense? Where did you guys come up with this, and what does it look like? What did it look like?
Yeah, so one of the projects that I worked on was the Vietnam Wall, stories behind the Vietnam Wall. And we had this vision that not only could CD-ROMs at the time or digital technology be delivered through the lens of entertainment, but we could also use it for edutainment, so education and entertainment, to engage students through the power of stories. And we had a producer who was a Vietnam War veteran who tracked 15 stories of names that were on the Vietnam Wall, who they were, what was their background, what did they do, what was their role in the Vietnam War, and how has their legacy since they passed moved on. And those stories, those relics, what's been left at the Vietnam War Memorial was all chronicled through this edutainment title. So that was just one of many different edutainment titles that we developed, produced, and distributed through Fox Home Entertainment in Los Angeles, California.
Tell me about your experiences then. How do you come up with these ideas, in a sense? Because entertainment in itself is tough. Education is out of this world difficult. How do you bring these two things together, in a sense, which at a glance may look completely opposing. And I know now we've got a lot of educational content that is extremely entertaining. But this was again when things were first starting out, like back when they were CD-ROM. So how did you start kind of like pitching and putting together ideas that were both entertaining, engaging, and educational?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the lean startup methodology. You know, the Eric Ries has a book. I'm really a big fan of a lean canvas, not necessarily a large, 6,500 page business plan, but it starts with a problem and a solution, and then wraps with all of the different components of what makes a good business. What is your target market? What is your value proposition? How do your strategies turn into tactics and deliverables and objectives and key results? But for me, with the best products, always started with a problem, always started with a solution, always started with a quantification of the market, and a value proposition, a theory of action or a theory of change that was rooted in research, that could be converted into a prototype or an MVP, a minimally viable product that could scale over time and be developed into a scalable solution that's solved a real world problem.
Yep. And how did you bring this kind of investment ethos, in a sense, to the work that you were doing, and see that when you were evaluating startups, in a sense, like you, as we spoke about, I think afterwards you started your own investment firm, in a sense, where you which is where I think you discovered pace, in a sense. When a company like that came to you, maybe even that story in particular, what was your initial reaction? How did you kind of merge that ethos with what you were seeing and what they were bringing to the table?
Back to the power of story, right? I talked high level just a moment ago about a problem and a solution, but let me bring it down to a story. So I was sitting in my office, and a gentleman came in with a backpack memo, and the backpack memo had an apple juice stain on the backpack memo. And he threw it down on my desk, and he said, "Darn it, John, is this how we're communicating with parents in schools these days? Still a backpack memo?" I was like, "Bennett, what do you mean? What's wrong?" And sure enough, on the backpack memo from his kindergarten son, there was an apple juice stain on the date and time of back to school night. He had gone to back to school night the night before, and the custodian said, "Sorry, sir, back to school night was 2 nights ago." So he got the date and time wrong of back to school night and was so frustrated. He came into my office and he said, "We're going to change the way schools communicate with parents. We're going to create the first and only school-to-home communications network that allows this administrator, this principal, to record a message and send it out to parents in a moment's notice." And then the rest is really history. I said, "You're crazy. That's already being done. There's polling applications for voting. There's direct marketing applications." He said, no, we're going to do some market research. We're going to quantify the market, and we're going to discover that this is not happening in schools. Now, this is the late 90s. And sure enough, there was a market opportunity, which we were able to quantify, which we were able to determine how much it would cost for a school to purchase a product like this. Slowly but surely, we got one elementary school, then one Southern California school district. We even had creative ways for it to be subsidized by corporate sponsors. Corporate sponsors were sponsoring the messages. This message is brought to you by our partner in education, Neil Klimo of Remax Premier Real Estate. So we got really creative with how the programs could be subsidized. Then we moved beyond just outreach communications, thinking that a more involved parent led to a higher achieving students. We started thinking about, well, Columbine happened a short time ago. How can we send or support emergency communications, not only through the telephones, but also through email or through texts? And so we developed an emergency communications capability. And sure enough, on 9/11, all of our New York clients were using it during the tragic events of 9/11. And then we woke up to attendance communications. So if you get attendance communications at home saying your son or daughter was marked absent today, please excuse the absence, we created that as well. So it was a full service integrated school to home communications platform that informed parents, allowed administrators to send messages during times of the unthinkable, as well as student attendance communications. And I get a lot of stories. I get a lot of email. the solution was used. Blackboard Connect was used during the tragic events of Parkland, during Santa Fe, and most recently during Uvalde. And while that event is tragic, many people are saying that it was the communications with parents that actually saved a lot of lives. Unfortunately, we lost 21 lives during that event, but it just warms the heart when you get those stories that your product or service that was kind of invented on a napkin is now used during life and death situations.
As I said, I think this is the real definition of impact, in a sense that like you can't go more than your work has been instrumental in saving lives. And I think that shows how brilliant of a solution it is, how elegant it was in terms of being simple enough to understand and to be implemented at a wide scale scope. Many times people don't see the need for something until tragedy strikes, in a way. So in those initial stages of kind of raising the seed round, talking to schools, getting this implemented, what were the biggest kind of, I would say, roadblocks or obstacles that you saw that you guys had to overcome in bringing the solution out there?
I share a lot about this. Some of the lessons learned, back when, my son was saying it's time to get a real job. I had sort of a few come to Jesus moments, right? One lesson was surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you. And I'll never forget, as I was trying to develop this partnership for academic and community excellence and kind of winging it, I wanted to be Steve Jobs, but I recognized I couldn't do this without having people who are a lot smarter than me join me and help me develop the value proposition. And it was important to recognize is I needed someone like a Tom Motter who knew how to sell into schools, knew how to position a product to be able to be embraced by a school system. I needed a Josh Roth, our CTO, who understood how to send emergency communications through the POTS, the plain old telephone service. To be able to get 50,000 calls out in under 15 minutes is like an art. I had no idea how to do that. So I had to surround myself with someone like Josh, who was super smart. I had to bring in someone like Gigi Goodling, who was my general counsel, who said, hey, you're selling into schools. You need to be thinking about COPPA and different privacy and security, FERPA. I was like, COPPA and FERPA. I had no idea what any of this meant. But if I tried to do that alone, the lesson learned there is bring in the smart people who can understand and think of things through the lens of legal affairs, sales and marketing, technology. So it was the weight of that thought leadership of my team that allowed me to excel and take that product, service, and solution to the next level. Very, very important lesson. I couldn't do it alone. And if I did, I probably would have failed many more times than I actually did before I actually got it right.
I know that every entrepreneur, in a sense, struggles with finding the right founding team and finding the right people in it. For you, in a sense, how do you go about maybe bringing together or at least knowing who was the right person to bring in at what point in time? Because you've got different needs as you're growing a business. Not everything is important at the same time. So how do you go about deciding, okay, I need this expertise. I'm going to focus on this aspect of the business and being able to do that successfully to bring something to market, in a sense?
I coach my mentees that it's about research. Really look at the benchmark companies that are in your space and look at who they brought in. Look at who their leadership is. What is their background? And I'll say, Harsa, that it's hard. We like to say that competing in the K-12 and even the pre-K to career education space is like dealing with the glacial pace by which they operate. It's very slow. And there's an art to being able to do this. So bringing in the right people through the process of benchmarking competitors and benchmarking some of those who are doing it really well, I think is critically important. It's also important to acknowledge that in this space, digital learning, education especially, there's a lot of cross-functionality, right? It's not just, I need a full stack engineer and any full stack engineer will do. It has to be a full stack engineer who understands things like interoperability. How does a product or service interoperate with a school's infrastructure? instructional designing. How do you develop a product or service that will be embraced by a classroom teacher or an administrator and work within their instructional episode environments? So really important to understand the art of instructional design, curriculum development, and how instructional designers and curriculum developers work with software developers. So it's really important to understand the interdisciplinary elements of those working relationships, the cross functionality that's required in between, those elements in terms of how a product or service is designed. It's really an art, takes a lot of research, takes a lot of benchmarking. And that's kind of what we do through our Entrepreneur in Residence program. Benchmarking, research, thinking about how to develop a cross-functional team and how that team will scale over time for sustainable competitive differentiation.
No, very cool in a sense. And I think we can put up a little bit of some photos of you speaking to students in a sense, in your lectures, bringing out like all of these phenomenal tips and tricks in a sense. Where was this lecture specifically? I think on campus. Tell us the story behind this photo.
Yeah, this was also the LBW, the Leadership in a Business World. That's at Steinberg Dietrich in one of the Wharton buildings. And I think that was also talking about lessons learned. And I think that part of my lecture really got down to measuring what matters, really thinking about if you can't measure it, it's not worth doing it. We talked in that lecture about the power of OKRs. I'm a big Andy Grove fan and John Doerr fan. OKRs are objectives and key results. Google uses them. Bono and U2 uses them. So we talked a lot about, how to measure the impact of what you're doing and why that matters as you're raising money, as you're growing your business, as you need to develop a culture of OKRs or KPIs, key performance indicators within your business. And if you can create that kind of culture, you'll be on the path to success.
That's a very good point in a sense. And I feel like from my conversations with people, especially in the education space and all of that, sometimes finding the right deliverables can be a little bit tricky. I mean, of course, like on one side, you can track attendance increase, you can track grades increase and all of that. But for many people in kind of like the education space, sometimes it can or maybe like I'd argue all entrepreneur spaces in a sense, it can be a little bit hard to decide on the metrics and really stick to it as you're seeing a project through in a sense. In your experiences of the many different projects that you've run, how do you know what is the one or two things that matter for you to track? Because as an entrepreneur, there's so much information, so much data, so much things that you can kind of look into, and you don't know going in which is going to be the best metric to look at. So how do you make that decision?
It's a great question. In my field, where I'm working with a lot of K-12 education ed tech products, we start by looking at standards, right? And standards are basically expectations. That could be Common Core. That could be SEL standards like CASEL standards. So there are prescribed or ascribed standards that are out there that say, unless you can align your product or service to those standards and demonstrate that your product or service delivers against those standards, you don't have an efficacious product or service. So we look at the standards that are out there and we think about data analytics, back-end dashboards that could demonstrate through an evaluative model how you're delivering on those standards through crosswalks, data analytics, and graphical impacts. So we start with standards in education, and we think about the analytics and the dashboards that need to be created to be able to demonstrate that you've been able to deliver that outcome.
Yeah, but it's kind of like, why are you measuring things that you think are important versus measuring things that are generally recognized as important and all of that. Okay, very, very good tip in a sense, a very good kind of a thought process in building out these things. Since we're kind of segueing into kind of the nitty-gritty details of what makes things essentially succeed, I thought we can talk a little bit about this. This is a talk you gave, I think, on how innovations flourish. Tell me about this in a sense. Tell me about the experience of or this whole program that you put together. I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So I'm part of a team of change makers at Catalyst at Penn GSE. It's the innovation center within Penn GSE, whose mission is to advance innovation, impact, and equity in worldwide education. We do that through a continuum of programming, including boot camps, in that case, How Innovations Flourish, webinars, meetups, and our signature program, which is our Milken Penn GSE Business Plan Competition, which is now in its 13th year. We've supported 1,500 EdTech entrepreneurs. We've given away $1.5 million in prizes and cash and prizes. And we've watched and supported those ventures go on to raise another $150 million in venture capital. So we're really big on impact and efficacy. But recently, we've started to raise the bar on this idea of equity. And that talk was global innovation and its impact on intentional equity and what that means. And what was fascinating about that roundtable or that webinar was how different countries think about equity. And when we think about equity, we're thinking about three core things. And when the global education industry is thinking about, they could be different, but they do, focus on three core areas. One is equitable access. How are people from all walks of life, from underserved communities, getting access to great education? Two is equitable experiences. We don't talk enough about how education, especially in the United States, was really built through the lens of a white construct. Well, how are we culturally inclusive? How are we ensuring that when we're teaching and students are learning, we're doing that through the lens of cultural inclusivity? The way that a white male learns could be different from a woman student of color. And we have to be mindful of that. And we have to train teachers to be mindful of that. So equitable experience is important. And then equitable outcomes. We can't just say, let's teach to the test, Park and Smarter Balanced, and that's it. We have to really think about what is success and what does that mean depending on the type of students that we're teaching. How are we developing critical thinking skills? How are we ensuring that students are mentally healthy? What are we doing to think about soft skills like empathy, driving, a service-based learning model where people are thinking of others and being empathic, and developing this world for others without being so conscious on, am I getting a 36 on my ACTs and getting into the best university? We're thinking about some of those other measures that would be pointing toward an equitable world as well. So equitable access, equitable experiences, and equitable outcomes in education is something that we've raised the bar on and focused on at Penn's GSE through our programming at Catalyst at Penn GSE.
This is something that I think is so phenomenal, and I think that more people should be talking about this, because I think it's something that is simple to think about, but not easy to do in practice in a sense, and it's not something often easily implemented, even though we all can agree that is logic in a sense, and that makes a lot of sense when you think about it objectively. How do you go about driving these changes in the level of policy, or at the level of kind of the school-wide level in a sense, beyond individual conversations? Or where does it start? Where does this change start?
I come back to OKRs, objectives and key results. We can talk all day long about equity, but unless we're institutionalizing them in the programming and measuring the outcomes of how you're delivering on that vision, mission, and core value, you're not doing it. I'll give you a perfect example. In our rubric for the Milken Penn GSE Business Plan Competition, our measures of what made one of those or 7 of those 250 applicants a finalist and 4 of them winners really was driven, when I first got to Penn GSE, around innovation. We had an innovation index. 2 years ago, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of these systemic issues that we're seeing, we said, no, we're now going to build a new rubric, publish it, let the applicants know that we are measuring your value through our program, through our competition, based on your acknowledgement and achievement and delivery on this rubric that involves intentional equity. Are you a founder of color? Are you really focused on equitable outcomes, equitable experiences, or equitable access, and how? And actually saying, we're not going to just say, what is their understanding of the market, or what is the innovation that they're delivering, and mark that equally with equity. We actually increased the value of intentional equity in how we were selecting our semifinalists, finalists, and ultimate winners. I think that's important, and so it starts with intention and ends with outcomes and ends with measuring the outcome. And we've been able to do that pretty well. We still have a lot of work to do, obviously, but we're really intentional in how we're doing it at Penn GSE.
No, as I said, I think you've tied those 2 points really, really well together, and I think you really show that it's not just about putting it out there, but it's about putting it in the rubrics, putting it in the evaluation criteria, really bringing that to the institution. You on one side are an amazing, like you have your educator hat, you have your entrepreneur hat, you also have another hat on kind of the philanthropic side. You mentioned about your family foundation and the work that you as a family do in kind of like for making sure that equal access and equal opportunities are provided to different groups of people. Tell me about how you see in your head at the very least how these different parts come to being. Some people say, oh, entrepreneurship is all we need, philanthropy can take a back seat. Others think, philanthropy is all we need, entrepreneurship and innovation can take a back seat in a sense. So you have all of these different components when you come in and approach problems in education. Why is that important?
Yeah, I think of it as the double bottom line: doing good and doing well at the same time. Very much as an entrepreneur, market driven. I believe in capitalism. I have a lot of debates at Penn GSE regarding whether education should be free, whether education should be valued through an economic capitalistic lens. I am a fan of public education, public free education, but I'm also a fan of innovation through the development of market-driven products and services. So there's a balance there. In terms of the philanthropic work, the Gamba Family Foundation was really born through this vision of serving the underrepresented communities in our country. As an aspiring entrepreneur, I walked through the halls of so many school districts where I said, wow, that's ripe for disruption. All of us have a business lens in our family. My mom, my dad, my sister, and I. Marketing, management, entrepreneurship, and my mom, as grew up in a family of entrepreneurs as well. So we're very much market driven, but also purpose driven. And there's certain things that we really believe in, like the deeper learning movement, not being so focused on teaching to the test, but developing critical thinking skills, creative problem solving skills. Students working in teams, character development. Really big fans of Angela Duckworth and her work in the character labs. And how we're developing, character and grit and developing a work ethic. We think is so critically important as we look out into the world and see some of these systemic inequities. What can we do to drive the power of self-awareness, self-esteem, self-direction, and incorporate some of that programming into the world of education? And that's where we're excited about allocating our funding. And we're not that big. My sister is the executive director of the foundation. We just gave away our millionth dollar, which we're very proud of. And we continue to, run the foundation like a business where we're measuring all of our investments and tracking the impact over time.
Very well said. I love that you brought up Angela Duckworth. I'm a positive psychology major, so again, like full fan of that in a sense. And personally, because of the work I run in education, and when I was choosing what to do for college, I was thinking, do I go the business lens? Do I go the character development lens in a sense? And I always thought, if I really want the work to flourish, part of it would also be looking at individual students and understanding the science of that a little bit more. So yeah, like that you mentioned, Angela.
So you're a fan of Marty Seligman. So that's a really big program here at Penn. There's also a really a growing program within Penn's GSE called the Center for Human and Optimal Development, and Dr. Nakala's work in possibility science. So not only positivity, but also possibility science. What happens when a student, a young student, especially from underrepresented communities, has a sense of possibility, that they think that whatever they want to do in life is possible, they can do it. So it's not only just positivity, but also possibility. And then what happens when you look at that through the lens of both? Somebody who is both positive and thinking that things are possible, then the real fun begins in terms of the research and what those students are capable of over time. And then unfortunately, what's the impact of those who are not positive and don't feel like anything's possible? And that's when we see aberrant behavior. That's when we see situations with law enforcement. That's where we see despair, depression, and even suicidal ideation, which is unfortunate. And what we're seeing a lot of in this mental health crisis that we face right now, post-pandemic.
Oh gosh, you've just doubled my reading list. This is terrible for me. But really cool stuff. I'm checking that out. You guys should check it out too if you're listening and you're equally as fascinated with all of this as I am. So thank you for that. I am very sad that we have apparently reached.
Wow, that flew by, didn't it? We could keep going for a while.
As I said, you have too many experiences to talk about. It's very sad as a listener, in a sense, that we have to bring this interview to a close. I normally do a wrap up, but I think we spoke about so many amazing things that I'll just end with in a sense this question, that you are someone who you have an amazing environment in a sense that seems to have shaped certain aspects of the work that you do. You come again from family of both business and entrepreneurship, and at the same time of having the education aspect mixed into it, and you've brought that to, I think, the next level in your own career. As someone who a Penn grad, parents of Penn grads, kids of Penn grads in a sense, what do you think is the most important thing in an environment of a kid growing up that enables them to achieve the things that they want to, and enables them to change their reality in a sense? And again, you work with this from many points of view. So what is the one thing in an environment that can help someone change their reality?
It's a great question. And, wrapping it all up with what I'm about to say, the research proves. So the possibility research, the positivity research, and I think it's demonstrating the paradox of humility and will. I say this a lot to the entrepreneurs that I mentor. You have to demonstrate the paradox of humility and will. What does that mean? Humility is, I'm willing to be coachable. I'm willing to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. I'm willing to learn more, research more, figure out how I can get through these up and down moments of being an entrepreneur. So I have humility and coachability, but I also have will. I'm willing to run through walls to be successful. Those who have that paradox, because sometimes that clashes, I see a lot of people who are very willful and willing to do whatever it takes to be successful, but not so coachable. I see a lot of coachability, but not enough hard work and willing to run through walls. So that paradox, when I see that come together, those are the entrepreneurs I like to work with. And those are the entrepreneurs that I believe are going to be the most successful through that lens of being double bottom line driven, doing good and doing well in this purpose-driven world of education and education technology.
Okay, that was the best wrap up I could have hoped for. And the evidence proves it in a sense. I'm very excited now to go and check out all of this new information that I have digested. But thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a really, really fun conversation. I've learned so much, and I can only assume that our audience has learned as much as I did and had as much fun as I did listening to you and your experiences. So
thank you, Harsha. It was really an awesome interview, and I hope to be back and whatever I can do to support your work on campus and beyond. I'd be happy to do it. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're too kind, and I really do appreciate that. To our audience, thank you as well for joining us on today's show. As always, if you enjoyed today's show, let us know. Give us a little like or comment below so that we can continue bringing you these different interviews, these different perspectives. And as always, this is Changing Reality, brought to you every Thursday at 10 p.m. ET. So come again next week, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.